Christine Palmer is Community Minister in Southwest Sydney in a new housing development, and she has created two groups of play in the park. Welcome, Christine.
As you say, I'm in the Southwest Growth Corridor of Sydney. So that means for anybody that knows Sydney, we're right down the south end, just up from Narellan, right up through to near Leppington, where the new airport will be being built. So there's a massive infill that's happening there, and the government is expecting that they will fill it to the size of population of Adelaide. So it really is a massive area. But right now, Parramatta Nepean Presbytery is focused on the area, I guess, which is at the bottom of that growth corridor, which is really taking shape at the moment. So at the moment, I'm based in the suburb of Gledswood Hills, and my ministry works within that suburb and surrounding, which is great. We're now reaching out beyond where we are in what we're doing. At the moment, the ministry that I'm doing revolves around a lot of families, and it's around a playgroup in the park which has formed called Play in the Park, and which has remarkably grown through COVID, which is just quite amazing, but what was needed, I think.
So how long have you been there, Christine, and how did you begin?
Right. I began in July of 2019. That's when I was placed here, and as part of developing a community or uniting church presence was to get to know and engage with our community. And so part of it was just being part of the community. It was joining the local Facebook pages. It was going along to things that were happening in the suburb and getting to know our neighbours. So yes, it was posting in the local Facebook page and watching and reading. Yeah.
So watching and reading what's happening within the community. So what were some of the activities that you went along to? Obviously, helpful that we could do face-to-face at that point, right? So what were some of the things that you went along to that were quite fruitful, and how was it that you developed connections?
Yeah, look, to be honest, I realised there wasn't a lot happening in our community, and that was part of learning about our community, was that there wasn't a lot of places for people to gather. When you know, in looking at the context we're in, looking at our physical environment was really important, because there weren't places or buildings to meet in. So it became the outdoor spaces that we have. And fortunately for us, our suburb has actually got some really good green spaces. They've thought quite intentionally about that. And they were the places that I realised that people did gather, in the parks that we have. And what I noticed through our local Facebook pages was that a number of the mums in particular would post, "Oh, I'm going to the park with my 5-month-old. Does anybody want to come and meet me there?" And at first I'm thinking, why would you take your 5-month-old to the park? And then I realised, it's not about the 5-month-old at the park. It's about the mum at the park wanting to connect with other people. So you could hear that connection and that desire to meet together with others.
So do the parks function as third spaces within your context, do they?
Yeah, they do indeed. Yeah. We've only just, our local school wasn't built for at least another year. So we now have a local school that people are just only beginning to start to meet others at, because of course COVID last year, they couldn't meet people. So our parks really are the third space in our suburb. That's where people gather. And otherwise there weren't a lot of other events. But I noticed that our community Facebook page was actually quite a friendly space, because I joined a few different local Facebook pages, and it became quite clear that there were different tones within those Facebook pages. And there was a real desire for people to have community in our local Facebook page. And also, if you look at all of the information and the brochures that are used by our land developers to sell our community, it's it's all about community, this community you'll move into. But when you actually get here, I think people realise, well, where is this community? How do I join in it? And so this was, I think, what we discovered was, how do you create a community for people who are sold this dream of community?
So with that, with the third space, and there not being kind of many places for that to happen, and when we say third space, we mean they're not places where people are working, and they're not the home, but they are places where people can meet. So it's like a third space, a different place where people, it's kind of neutral ground, I suppose, is a good way to express it. But how developed are these suburbs that you're talking about? Like, when are people moving? Like, how long had they been living there?
Yeah. When I moved in here, probably some of the oldest residents here had been here for 4 years, maybe. So that the suburb has 2 land developers, and this, where I am, it's the older section, where I'm living, and
older section being 4 years.
Yeah. And the other section is perhaps is still being built, and a lot more people are moving in there than they are in this section that I'm in. So there were pockets. You could see some streets had developed pockets of community that were there, and that was exciting to see, where some pockets of community were, and there are others that nothing. So it became, how do you engage? Yeah.
Now, and have you looked at the research, and is there anything that you can say about people's openness to finding new friends and so forth when they move into a new place?
Yeah, from my understanding is that first year or 2 is really crucial in when people make and engage with people. So I think that's really important to keep in mind, is when, as people move into the area, that's when they're really looking for those relationships and to develop and build those key friendships. And it's interesting to watch that dynamic take place, and to see it over and over again as we have newer people come along to play in the park that we run now. So yeah, I think as people move in, that's a really crucial time. It's a life transition, and people are looking and exploring, and I think they're open to having a relationship with others.
Yes, exactly. This was one of the things that I personally found fascinating when we moved. So we moved 16 and a half years ago into the house that we're living in now, for me to become the minister in Narre Warren North and Hampton Park. And one of the things I found fascinating was that our eldest son was going to kinder. And when we moved in the January, we went to the local kindergarten, and I noticed that there were some families who were just leaving as soon as they had dropped their children off. But then there were other families who were kind of hanging around. Now, they weren't just hanging around to watch their children. They were actually hanging around to get to know some of the other families. And it took me a little while to actually work out what was going on. But what was going on was that there were spaces within their relationship networks for those people who were hanging around because this was their eldest child. Whereas the families who were leaving were all of those families who this was their second or third or fourth child, and they already had their relationships established. They didn't need any more new friends. They weren't interested in forming relationships with other people. So it's really interesting, and we're still friends with all these families because we came in needing friendship at that kind of stage of life, all at exactly the same time, because our relationship kind of void wasn't filled. So we filled it up with these people, and then we've stuck with them. And that's one of the things that's so kind of important, I suppose, for churches to understand the potential of growth corridors and new suburbs, because you've got all of these people who are open to the possibility of new friendships.
Yeah, and if you put on that, I think it will be fascinating to watch how this suburb develops, because where we are is sort of on the outer of this growth corridor, which will lead up into what will be a more significant area. And I think it will cost more housing wise as they move up into this area, which will be closer to the airport, closer to the bigger facilities they'll be building. So it may well be that it's an older demographic that buy their houses there. But where we are, it's all young families. And again, when you've just had a new baby, you're looking for people who can share that experience with you. And again, it's another life stage and transition and an openness to finding new relationships with people.
So fantastic. You've talked us through some of the stuff. So you arrived, you've listened to the community, and part of the way that you listened was to engage through social media, which is where everybody's kind of, you talk about a third space, well, bang, right? Social media is where everybody's meeting new people and so forth. And then even putting it out there, I'm going down the park, who wants to come? So how is it that you then responded, recognizing what was happening within the community and where the third spaces were? Now, I think it's important to suggest, I don't know this because I haven't asked this question, but I'm assuming you do not have a building that you can access.
No, not at all. Not at all. One of the things I was doing was, I did invite, I wanted to go walking in the suburb and get to know people. So I asked others if they wanted to go walking. So I made a few connections that way. So built some relationships via walking with people. And also in my head, I had this sense that I thought we might need an outdoor play group, and was thinking about, well, how do I start that? And I'd been praying about that. And then I discovered, again, through social media, that somebody else, another young mum, was trying to do this. They were trying to put together an outdoor play group. And so my theory has always been, why would I do something myself? Why don't I join in what's already happening, what God's already doing in the place where we are? And so I contacted this mum and told her who I was. And I just said, look, I'd been thinking we needed something like this, and I was thinking of doing it, but I can see you're already trying to do it. How can I help? I'd really love to help. And so I just offered myself to her to help. And
so can I just say that is genius, because it's already happening. You're not competing. It's her heartburst, and you recognize that you can come in and support somebody else's heartburst. That is brilliant. I'm really intrigued. What was her response when you said you were a Uniting Church minister? Like, what did she?
Yeah, look, it's interesting because I said I was a community minister with the Uniting Church. She didn't really respond to that in any way. And what is the most bizarre thing is, and you'll probably be a bit stunned when I say this, but I have never met her. To this day, I've still never met this woman. Because she was very keen for me to help, but she was so busy that she didn't even really have time to meet with me. And she wanted to hand stuff over, and she said, what I'd really like, that would be so great. We just need somebody to organise us because I'm busy. This is a young mum, new children, also trying to start off a business in a new house. And she said, I've even got some stuff the local land developer gave me to use that you can come and get. And trying to organise with her when to pick it up. Again, she was so busy, it just never worked out. And so I sort of inherited or joined in this idea with her. And in the end, she's not come along for the journey, if that makes sense, but actually given her blessing to hand it over, which is quite a fascinating, because it would have been lovely to have had her join in that journey. But that's not quite how it happened. And so sort of we had our first initial, I organised them to get together. Some of us are going to get together and have a go at this and see who'd turn up. Yeah.
So, so how did you advertise it? What was the response? And then what kind of came of that?
I again used our local Facebook pages because there wasn't a local place to hang up a sign or do anything, and most people tend to ignore that, or if you put anything in people's letterboxes it tends to just add to the recycling bin. So again, social media, just invited, and again I said, tried just to share what we were thinking of doing and that I was, joining in, with what was happening, and invited people to come along to the park I think I put out a poll to say what day might be best. People suggested Monday, so I went with that. And we turned up at the park on Monday. I took a lot of my children's old toys with me. This is pre-COVID when you could share. And little tables and chairs. And turned up at the park with a few extra things and just introduced myself to anybody that turned up at the park and said, hey, this is what we're doing. Have you come to join us? And if they hadn't, they're like, no, I hadn't come to join you, but that sounds good. I'll stay and have a pie. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So that's how it started. There were some lonely days on the hill and it was windy and cold and hardly anybody turned up. But it took time. And I think that's part of the key is being present and just being there. And in the end, we got a grant. We ended up getting a grant to get some toys too, which was really helpful.
So, and was that through the local council or how'd you get the grant?
No, it was through Uniting Church Stamp Committee.
Oh, right. Okay,
yeah, they collect the stamps and they get money, and so they then want to funnel that money back out into in community things. So yes, so we were able to get some things in that way.
Fantastic. There's something else too, I think, that I'd like to draw out about that story about the woman who wanted to start the group but didn't have the time. One of the things that I think is really, really important is to not always go with just what people say or say they want, but actually work with the people who have discretionary time. Because if people don't have discretionary time, they can have the biggest dreams in the world, but if they're never going to get to any of that stuff, nothing ever changes. So this is one of the things that I think is really important, to make sure we're aware of whether we're kind of investing in people or building relationships with people who have discretionary time or not. That I think that's a big factor that we need to take into consideration. Now, so what happened? You've been on the hill sometimes. It's been a bit lonely and windy and so forth. You've got the grant, so you got the toys and so forth. But was there a point where there was a little bit of momentum that was built and greater consistency?
Yeah, there was. I think because sort of from the start, I did have another person who had came along and volunteered with me and helped share that with me, and that was really great to have their support. And so yes, there would sometimes be just the two of us on the hill. But I think we just decided we would wait it out and see, and we just kept letting people know it was happening, and slowly word of mouth filtered out too. Probably towards the end of that year, we started in August 2019, and by the end of the year we were starting to get a few regulars, getting a nice little handful of regulars. And then when the next year happened, I think again, the start of the year, again, it's a time where people are reassessing what they do with their time. They're looking for something. And by advertising in the local Facebook page, again, it started to grow. And we had a nice regular group of 25 that were coming along. And so that was working nicely. And then COVID hit. And I really thought that would be the end of it. And that's where we really, again, used social media again. Like everybody else, we took the group online. We started our Facebook group. And over COVID, that Facebook group grew as people heard about it and found out about it. And then as restrictions were slowly lifted, well, I'll back up a bit. Like everybody else, I learnt new Zoom skills, and we tried to have some Zoom group connections, which didn't work. That was good learning. Because they were all new, they didn't know each other, trying to connect on Zoom became awkward. So in the end, it became me as a connection point, just reading some stories for the kids, singing a few songs, poor things, had to endure that, and doing some craft online. So, and we started to think about what we called take-home craft packs. So they were craft in a bag that people could take. And yeah, so that happened. Then as restrictions lifted, we had some people really keen. You know, we were allowed to meet 10 of us, I think, outdoors. And so I just said, look, I'll be at the park if anybody wants to drop in. Little did I know I was going to break restrictions when I said that, not thinking, really underestimating how many people needed to connect.
Yeah, absolutely. That was my personal experience. As soon as the restrictions were lifted, it's like, I want to see as many people as I possibly can, right? So, I think we all get that.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, there was a significant need for mums who'd had babies during that time and who'd had no mums groups, no learning together, all the things that other people had experienced. They had nothing. So we'd have mums with newborns turning up to meet in a park, and it got to the point where I would have to ask people to let me know, and we had to restrict things, and we had no toys. So this is just people standing in the middle of the park having to connect in that way, as well as then I started saying, well, if people want to go for a walk, I'm happy to go walking on another morning. So a few of us would go walking semi-regularly in that way. But as time went on, the group grew online. Different people told different people about it. As restrictions lifted and numbers grew, and we were allowed to have 50 at our outdoor gatherings, then the play group grew in size. And I've not really advertised the play group since lockdown in March 2020. And now we've had to grow. We've grown to 2 mornings a week. And we have about a regular between 40 and 50 on a Monday morning that come along. And we have on our Wednesday morning, we now have between 30 and 40 that come along. And our online group's over 400, which is great.
Wow.
Which is really good, because they're now starting to interact online, which was my goal. I didn't want it just to be me posting, and now some of them are investing and posting, and we just had a biggest morning tea. We've run that outdoors again. We've developed a relationship with a local coffee van, a guy in the suburb, again, local connection, who has a coffee van, and he's now coming along when he can. So the first question the mums ask me is a coffee van coming this morning? So that's great.
That is fantastic. So really, right, you're a community minister, Christine, and you have curated community and really with not many resources. So it's you, right? It's you. There's a bit of space in the park, right? So it's you, your time, God's blessing upon all of this, the church's blessing upon all of this, but, not many resources. But then you've recognized what happens within the community. You've recognized whereabouts there is need, and you've actually met that need. So, I think that's brilliant. I'm getting excited hearing about it. Because I love these stories where community is formed. And, this is kind of like the best of the church, right? Because the church is doing what it should be doing, building community amongst people. So one of the questions, though, I suppose, is whereabouts does faith come into this? So, and I'm really intrigued to know what it is that people think about the fact that you're a Uniting Church minister and all of that. But I can tell just from this conversation, right? You're a warm person, you're a capable person, you're a gentle person, and people would really warm to you. So you've got to, you're ticking a lot of boxes there.
That's very kind of you.
But what is, how do people respond? And what is it you're thinking about the whole faith component of building the community?
Yeah, well, what fascinates me is some people aren't even aware that it's a church thing, even though we now have a big teardrop banner that I stick up that says Play in the Park, and it has the Uniting Church logo on it. And it took me a while before I did that, because I was really conscious that this had been something started in the community. So I was really hesitant to name it. I didn't want to claim it as a uniting, that this was our church thing now. So that was a process of doing that, and wanting to honour the people where the idea and the community that it had generated from. It's funny because I wear my Christine Palmer community minister badge, and I have my t-shirt that says Uniting Church. So it's my way of trying to be open about who I am. It's often what I'll lead with, because I never want people to think I'm doing a bait and switch. I'm getting you in and now I'm saying you're part of the church. Or the
worst thing where you don't tell them up front that you're a minister, and then 2 hours into the conversation they start swearing their head off, and then later on they find out you're a minister and they're really, really embarrassed. So
yes, that's often the time I often assure them, if I was feeling that way, I might use those words myself. To which they're a bit amazed. But anyway, so it is interesting. Some people I have to explain, like I'll say, I'm Christine, or they'll say, why do you do this? It's really lovely that you volunteer. And I'm always pretty quick to point out that they understand, yes, I love doing this, and I probably would volunteer to do this, but it is actually part of my vocation and part of my work, because I don't want them to ever feel like I've been deceitful in who I am and what I'm trying to do. I want them to understand that, yes, this is actually work. In some ways it's ministry work, but it's work that I love, just so that they understand, and that sense of honesty is there. And some people are like, oh yeah, that's cool, that's really good what you're doing. That's really good what you're doing for the community. So yeah, and I've found that from being present in the social media pages that we have, two people now have an understanding. Another thing I do is I'm a collection point. I've connected with a local community organisation that does food hampers, because why would we do it if they're already doing it well? And so people sometimes I'll put out a note inviting people to drop off food to my place, and I take it down to this community organisation. And that's been another way to connect with neighbours, and, because I never let them just drop it off. We always have a conversation. And so building relationships there. So it's just been letting people gently know who I am and what I'm doing, and they all seem fine. Some of them are very curious because they want it but where is the church? They'll say, where is the church? Where's the building? And it's actually really interesting, the expectations that the community has when you talk about church, or some just have no idea. And so again, it's an opportunity to share with them.
Yep. So you're living in the community though?
Yes.
Is that a church provided house?
It is. It is.
So that was really good. That was really good foresight to actually make sure there's a house there.
Yeah, it actually meant it makes me authentic, in the sense that I'm just not loitering in somebody else's park.
Yeah.
I'm actually
you're one of them.
Yeah.
You're a neighbour. Yeah. That's exactly right. So what are you thinking in terms of the faith? And the potential of developing a Christian community or whatever?
Yeah, so the faith stuff, part of my goal with our Facebook group, our Play in the Park Facebook group, has been to do some, to explore a bit more of meaning, life meaning. So a couple of the posts I post will be funny memes about parenting, and others will be just thinking about life, or, what do we need to let go today? Or, it's the things like that. when it's been Christmas, I've offered a video reflection, a very short 2-minute reflection that's connected, and the same with Easter. So I've been able to just share briefly and try and do it in a way that connects with the community. So link what's, I guess, the faith story with the real life stories we're experiencing in a way. And it's been fascinating to see how people have responded to that and actually commented below. So I found that really interesting. It's fascinating because we have a lot of Muslim neighbours, and the other day I found myself breaking fast with 3 of the Muslim mums after playgroup, and that was just lovely because they were sharing their faith with me and I was able to share a bit more about my faith with them. So that's really lovely too. It's lovely to be part of those conversations. And the other things that we've done is there's a couple of ways I've tried to engage at what I call hallmark events like Christmas and Easter. So last Christmas, normally our land developers will offer a Christmas event, but due to COVID they didn't. So I invited people in our local neighbourhood to come together to create a Christmas event. What could we do together? And so we were able to work together, and we created a local Christmas scavenger hunt around our neighbourhood where we had developed posters for that connected with Christmas carols and had QR codes on them where they could find or play the Christmas carol that went with the poster. And there were activity bags, and we had our local club joined in and donated things. A local cafe was happy to hand out the bags once people followed the clues to the cafe, and we had local Officeworks printed all our posters for free. So it became a real community event, but it was still COVID safe because families could do it at their own thing. So that was another way of gently engaging at Christmas. And it was lovely to have different people support and help. And my role was just to help bring it together so that it really was very much a community event. And then at Easter time, the other faith stuff was engaging, offering an Easter celebration. So, and I was quite clear that this would be different to our normal play in the park because I'd like to respect that play in the park space so that people feel comfortable in that space. But again, it's another space beyond it where I guess I'm looking at how can we connect. And so I was
So you specified that this was going to be more intentionally Christian.
Yeah, I was going to share the Easter story, the Jesus Easter story. So I was quite clear about that. And because it was still an outdoor limit of 50, I had to ask people to register, and within 24 hours, our limit had been reached.
Wow.
Within the park, and which just because I thought this will be an experiment. I've got no idea if anybody will be interested. And to my amazement, I shouldn't be amazed by God, but but all of the tickets were gone by it cost nothing. Maybe the free Easter egg hunt was a bit of a selling point. But they came, and because some people expressed their disappointment, I then offered a second one that afternoon. So we had 2 different sessions. So overall, we had, with 80 parents, children, I was able to share the Jesus Easter story with them. And from that, we now have a number of interested families that are meeting together. I just invited them. I just said to them, I've been thinking about the Easter celebration, and a number of you said how good it was. I wondered if we'd like to do something like that regularly. Maybe once a month we can get together in the park, we can share a Jesus story, we can do some activities around that, and we can share food. COVID safe, all of course. But yeah, and I think every one of those people said, yeah, I'm really interested. And some people are interested in helping make it happen. Some said, I'm interested if it happens. So there was, again, those different levels. And so, because I'd been praying for the last 6 months, sensing that where were going to be the opportunities for conversations about faith, and praying that God would show where that would happen next. So, that's the exciting space we're in now, is exploring how faith in the park might take shape. And I'm really keen for these families to own it and to be part of developing what that looks like and how we might do that. And again, their families, some of them have had no church experience. Some of them have been part of a church before and aren't any longer. So, yeah, it's a really interesting space and an exciting space to be part of at the moment.